so it's time for Module 2. In this module, we'll dig into the details of real estate property analysis. This is critically important to your success as an investor because the performance of each property you own will determine your overall success, the overall success of your portfolio, right? This means that learning how to quickly and thoroughly evaluate a property as an investment is very, very important. You'll learn how to analyze a real estate deal, how to cover the primary factors of property analysis. Here are a few of them that we're going to cover. What I call the RV ratio, or the rent to value ratio. Something else that it took me many years to discover, and it was just kind of an accident, I call it the Hartman Risk Evaluator. We'll talk about return on investment, otherwise known as ROI for short. We'll talk about cap rates, or capitalization rates. We'll talk about cash on cash return. So let's dive in and let's get started and learn how to analyze a deal. Welcome back. This is Jason Hartman, your instructor, talking to you today with our lesson on something that is so deceptively simple. It amazes me how many people just do not get this incredibly simple concept. So prepare to be underwhelmed with today's lesson. Yes, underwhelmed. How do you like that? The reason this amazes me is that we're going to talk about RV ratios, or rent to value ratios. And it amazes me how many people call me up and they're analyzing a deal and they're thinking, should I buy this property in which to live, or should I rent this property to live in? Or should I buy this investment property, or should I buy that investment property? And I cannot believe how incredibly simple this is. And I know I've been talking about it for, 9 years on the podcast, and still people wonder about this thing. So brace yourself for an extreme dose of simplicity. Did I undersell you on this lesson? I hope so, because it really is quite simple. This is a really easy to use metric. I started talking about this little trademark term, rent to value ratio, in the way I calculate it. Now, other people certainly before me have said rent to value ratio or something similar, but they're calculating it differently. I think my way is the simplest, and I think you're going to love it. This is a really easy thing to master and understand that, as Einstein said, it's about relativity, right? We're not talking about E equals mc squared here. This equation is so amazingly simple, you're just not even going to believe it. But it's a very important tool for a good, prudent real estate investor. All right, let's dive in. What are we going to learn in this lesson? We are going to learn how to calculate the rent to value, or RV ratio. We are going to learn what makes the RV ratio increase or decrease, for that matter. And we're going to learn, I said decrease, right? So let's just keep on going here. This one's so simple it almost bugs me. It's so easy, right? So how do you calculate it? This is so simple, as I said. It's just the monthly rent. And if you really wanted to be good at it, you would calculate it net of the vacancy rate. I don't know of any properties, folks, that are occupied 100% of the time. And there are two types of vacancy as real estate investors that we need to know about. The type most people think about is, you have a tenant in a property and they move and the property is vacant. That's called physical vacancy. There's another type of vacancy that is known as economic vacancy. Well, what do I mean by economic vacancy? It means the tenant is still there and they're a deadbeat and they're not paying us. We don't like either of these. We don't want physical or economic vacancy. However, we really need to assume that any residential property, now commercial property is much different. Some of those properties have very long vacancies, and I'm sure you have noticed that in driving around your own town or city. You'll see for lease signs on commercial properties that have been there for a long time. I really love housing, whether it be single-family homes, which is my favorite, or apartment buildings, which are my second favorite. I've owned both of those. And my third favorite, also in the housing category, mobile home parks. I am actually buying one of those, maybe two of them, right now as at the time of this recording. We've got one that we're definitely trying to buy, and that's in the hopper. But the other one, we're still negotiating on that one, myself and my client partner. Apartments and single-family homes, yeah, I got a lot of experience in those. I've had hundreds of tenants over the years, and I can tell you they are my favorite type of investment. So what kind of vacancy rate do you want to assume? Well, I say on the residential, on the housing category, you want to assume an 8% vacancy rate, or 1 month per year. 1 month per year is right about 8%. The rent-to-value ratio is so simple, like I've been saying, and I'm just going to use some nice round numbers because you can do this in your head. You don't need anything to calculate this. 1%. That is a good target. 1%. Well, 1% of what, you ask, right? 1% of the value. Well, how often should I get this 1%? Every month. Well, at least 11 months of the year, okay? So if you have a $100,000 single-family home, and it rents for $1,000 per month, we're only talking about gross numbers here, not net numbers. If it rents for $1,000 per month, and you can collect $1,000 per month for 11 months of the year, you're probably doing pretty good, okay? You are probably doing pretty darn good as an investor. And of course, when you look at the entire pro forma, and it's got all of the different numbers, the cap rate, the debt coverage ratio, the cash-on-cash return, the overall return, or ROI, return on investment, and a lot of this stuff we're going to touch on in the course. When it's got all of these metrics, that 1% RV ratio will usually get you, all things considered, if you've got a decent appreciation rate and you've leveraged the property, it will get you somewhere in the neighborhood, and it varies because expenses on each property vary and different things vary, right? But it'll get you somewhere in the neighborhood of 25 to 35% annual return on investment. And that's overall return on investment. That includes appreciation, okay? And we're going to dissect some of that stuff later on in the course. So we'll get there. Don't worry about it, okay? So 1%, easy. Do it in your head. If it's a $70,000 single-family home, how much should it rent for? $700 per month. If you're getting more than $700, you're doing great. If you're getting a little less than $700, that's okay. If that $100,000 property rents for $900 or even $850, that could still be a pretty good deal. Depends on some other characteristics, right? It's not all about rent-to-value ratio. The rent-to-value ratio is just this really simple rule of thumb. It's just a really easy thing that you can obviously do right in your head. We're going to dive into some other parts of it as we talk about the market value input and the current market values. So rent-to-value ratio, I want you to notice something about it. The rent-to-value ratio is not called the rent to what I paid for it 10 years ago ratio. Notice that. It's not called the rent to what I paid for 15 years ago ratio. It is called the rent to value ratio. So if you have a highly appreciated property that you've owned for a long time, that is not what you're comparing it to, because the unused equity in that property represents an opportunity cost. As an investor, we always want to consider opportunity cost. So rent-to-value ratio is the current market value versus the rent. So if you've got this highly appreciated property and it's worth $500,000 now, but you're only getting $2,000 per month, that deal stinks. I don't like that deal at all. I want to get $5,000 per month for $500,000 worth of real estate, somewhere in the neighborhood of 1%. Doesn't have to be exact, but in the neighborhood. So what is the takeaway here? Okay? The RV ratio allows us to quickly compare the relative strength of rents across a portfolio of properties. Now, another thing this will really help you do, this will help you sort through other investors' faulty assumptions. What are they? Well, you might be talking to an investor, and the investor will say, I've got 5 properties, and they all have positive cash flow as their chest inflates, and they think they're doing a great job investing. But that doesn't give us enough information. We need to know what the value of those properties is versus the rent. I mean, you can have positive cash flow if the properties are highly appreciated and there's a bunch of equity sitting there. You could have positive cash flow from day one if you paid cash for the property. Or what if you put a lot down? What if you put 50% down rather than 20% down? Then you'll have positive cash flow, I hope. So that doesn't tell us. It's the rent to value ratio. It's about relativity. So increases in rent, this is something that makes this rent to value ratio increase, obviously, right? That's good news if rents are going up and we own a lot of properties. We love that type of thing. Okay, what about decreases in market value? Now, nobody would really consider this a benefit, but it could be in a way. If the market value goes down, but the rent stays the same, the ratio actually improves. Let me let you in on a little secret of real estate. I've been investing for many years, and I've made a lot of money investing in real estate. It is my favorite investment, bar none. It is the most historically proven asset class in the world. One of the things you have to know is that prices usually, actually almost always, they are more volatile than rents. Rents adjust either up or down much more slowly than prices do. Prices are the leading indicator and rents are the lagging indicator. So if you see prices decline, that could happen. And it doesn't happen quickly like it does on Wall Street or in the stock market, but that could happen more quickly than rents. Now, why is that, you might think? That happens because a lot of tenants are on one-year leases and they all expire at different times. So they're not out shopping rents every day, like, what is that one down the street going for? Their rents are much more stable than property prices, especially in the which markets? We talked about that in a prior lesson. The cyclical markets. The linear markets, prices don't fluctuate that much, okay? And those are our favorite markets, right? So rent-to-value ratios in blighted areas can look good on paper because the prices are so low. Now, we talked about blighted areas before. We talked about Detroit. This is obviously a blighted area. You can buy houses very inexpensively in areas like Detroit. The rents may look good. In fact, a lot of times there are groups and different promoters out there promoting properties that look something like this. Buy this property for $30,000. It's a single-family home, and you think, wow, that's a pretty great deal. That's so cheap. I mean, how can I go wrong? It's just cheap. And you can rent this property to someone who works at McDonald's on minimum wage, and they'll pay you $400 a month, and they can afford that. And you know what? That sounds like a rational argument. But in blighted areas, and when you deal with really low-end tenants, it never seems to work out as well as it looks on paper. You got to ask yourself, why do big investors and why do institutional, really big investors like higher price Class A and Class B properties? Because they know you just get a better tenant quality, even if you don't get as good a rent-to-value ratio. A lot of those rent-to-value ratios that look so good are really, they only look good on paper. In practice, they just don't seem to work out that way, okay? So rent-to-value ratios increase the most sharply when the waves of foreclosures that push down prices while pushing people out of the homeowner pool and into the renter pool. We saw this happen in the Great Recession. Now, the government admittedly got in the way, as they shouldn't have. I can't stand when the government gets in the way. I like the government to get out of the way and let the market do its thing. But when the government got in the way and started, putting a lot of pressure on the banks and keeping them from foreclosing on people and, pressuring them to do loan modifications and all of that stuff, that perverted the market a little bit, because the people that normally would have been foreclosed on, jumped out, gotten into the renter pool, the market would have healed itself much more quickly because of something called price discovery. The government, by its intervention, slowed down the price discovery, and that, in my humble opinion, is an unhealthy thing. Certainly some people disagree with me, and they're welcome to, even if they happen to be wrong. Okay. Got to throw in a little character and humor here, right? And a little controversy. All right. What makes the RV ratio decrease? Well, if rent goes down, obviously the RV ratio is going to decrease, right? And the rents will compress. But population flight from an area or rapid increases in the rate of ownership. Remember, renter population and owner population in a given area are competing for housing stock. So we like it when there's a high renter population and fewer people are owners or fewer people are buying, because as landlords, our customer is the tenant, the renter. Okay, so that's good for us. Well, what if the market value goes up? We touched on that before. If the market value goes up a lot, remember, rents lag prices. They lag them pretty significantly, so they inch up much more slowly than market values in an area. So this occurs when you have these cyclical markets, like we talked about, these bubble-type markets, and the prices go up very quickly, but the rents, they just don't go up nearly as fast. So decreases in rent-to-value ratios occur, in most cases, from either people leaving the rental pool or seeing market values go up quite a bit. All right, let's take a look at how we research this stuff. We're going to go back to good old Zillow. We've talked about Zillow a lot. So you just go to the website and you enter any market. So if you're looking in Indianapolis, as you see on this screen, we've done lots of business in that market for many, many years, and it's been very good in terms of a cash flow market. But you can look anywhere. So put in your market and then select a property to research. Just pick one. It doesn't really matter for this purpose. And then you're going to see the Zestimate, the estimate of the value, and then you're going to see the rent Zestimate, the estimated rent. Now look at this one on your screen. It says the value is about $132,000 and the rent is $1,252. Of course, it's not exact, it's an estimate. But what do you think of that deal? Is that a good deal or is it a bad deal? I think it's a pretty good deal. It's not quite 1%, but it's in the neighborhood. If it was 1%, it would be basically about $1,320 per month. And it's not a bad deal at all. That's a pretty decent deal. If that property were in an expensive city in, say, California or South Florida or the northeastern states and those very expensive markets in New York, Connecticut, etc., Washington, D.C., this would be way out of whack. The rent-to-value ratio might be 0.5. Now, remember we talked about vacancy rate. You've got to always consider vacancy rates in there. So this is really easy, isn't it? I mean, I know you're probably underwhelmed thinking, Jason, this is not rocket science. You're right. It's not rocket science. It's really simple. If I could tell you the number of people that have called into my show with questions and said, hey, what about this property or that one? And they're just not thinking about the rent-to-value ratio. It's deceptively simple. So select a market. Here's your action item. Got to get your badge, right? Select a market, calculate the RV ratio for 10 properties. This is a super easy calculation, so you can do 10 of them in no time, right? And then use the template provided and take a screenshot of it and upload it. And that'll get you your badge completion, and it'll be done. And we will see you on the next lesson.